Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian, and today we are going to be talking about Doctrine and Covenants sections 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. And don't you worry, it's not going to be a bunch of long sections. For example, section 13 has like one verse in it, but they're very important. There's a lot of things leading up to it. We're going to be talking today about early translation of the Book of Mormon. We're going to be talking about the copyright of the Book of Mormon. We're going to be talking about Joseph Knight Sr. We're going to be talking about David, Peter, and John Whitmer. We're going to be talking about the 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon. We're going to be talking about some of the 8 witnesses to the Book of Mormon. So there's a lot of things to cover. We're also going to talk about the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood and some of the instances around that. I'm going to give as much as I can from, or everything that I found anyway, from the Joseph Smith papers. And so, quite a lot of material to cover. So I might go a little fast today just because there's a lot to cover. And I'm also going to try to follow the order of the Joseph Smith papers. So welcome back. I hope you're enjoying. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I keep saying we. It's just me. I am doing, well, anyway, the royal we. You and me, perhaps. Anyway, so Doctrine and Covenants, sections 12 through 17. So what we're going to do, part 1 here, we're going to start with section 12, the title page to the Book of Mormon, and some early translations of the Book of Mormon. So a bit of an introduction to the papers of section 12 is pretty easy. Is that 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 in our current Doctrine and Covenants are not in either one of the Revelation books. Section 13, for example, is not even a section. It is actually just an extract from actually draft 2 and 3 from the manuscript history. We're going to get into that. And so the order that we currently use in the church in the 2013 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants is based on the manuscript history of the church, or what you could call, History of the Church, Volume 1. So that's why they're in the current order that they're in. But the Joseph Smith papers, the documents volume 1, follows a different order. So that's what we're going to try to follow today with one exception. So section 12 is going to be the first thing we talk about. Then we've got the earliest Book of Mormon manuscript writings. That begins in 1 Nephi chapter 2. So that is from the original manuscripts that they used to translate the Book of Mormon. And then there's a printer's manuscript that they used to actually publish the Book of Mormon. But we're going to use just give you a sample of what it is, according to what the Joseph Smith papers has done. We're also going to be going into the title page of the Book of Mormon. There's some interesting things there. After that, again, this is Documents Volume 1, says Section 14, and then it's Section 18, which we won't get too much into today because there's a whole episode about that. Section 15, then Section 16, then the copyright of the Book of Mormon, and I'm going to kind of take that out of order just to keep the topics together, and then Section 17. So if you're not thoroughly confused yet, let's just get into it. So Section 12 is lost from Revelation Book 1, but it's also missing from the Revelation Book 1 index. So it might never have been in a Revelation book at all. This is Section 12. And so the earliest version that we have is actually Book of Commandments, chapter 11. It's also found in the first edition of the Doctrine and Covenants in 1835 under section 38. So this is an interesting thought, that it was actually never in these sort of bound, written manuscript volumes. So where did you get it from? Where did they print it from? It was in the very earliest publication, which is the Book of Commandments. So we get from the historical introduction, this is from Documents Volume 1 about Section 12. It says, "The Book of Commandments contains the earliest copy of this revelation. John Whitmer did not include a copy in Revelation Book 1, indicating that Joseph Smith may not have kept a copy or may have lost his copy. The editors of the Book of Commandments included the revelation, however, perhaps relying on a personal copy of the text kept by an early believer. When in May 1829 this revelation was dictated is unknown, in part because it is unclear how many times and when Knight, Joseph Knight Sr., traveled to Harmony to assist Joseph Smith." And from the footnote of that, we also get, this is footnote 8 that the editors of the Joseph Smith papers wrote. It says, "Early revelations were often personal enough that recipients or people close to them retained copies. Several Knight family members, as well as Oliver Cowdery, were living in Jackson County, Missouri in late 1832 when this revelation was typeset. It is reasonable to assume that one of them provided a copy of the revelation to the compilers of the Book of Commandments, though no such copy has survived. So another way to get a revelation is just keeping your own personal copy. But all of those are lost. So there's your papers introduction. There is no papers to look at besides the Book of Commandments. So that's where we get it from. So what are the circumstances leading up to this? Well, if the revelation itself is directed to a man by the name of Joseph Knight Sr. And in it, it's basically answering a question very similar to Hiram Smith. And we're going to get to that in a moment too, about where do I fit into all of this? And he gets an answer about the importance of the work, about how it's coming forth and it's marvelous and miraculous, and about his role in it of keeping commandments, seeking to bring forth the cause of Zion is a phrase used. And that's all sort of put together in this section for him. It's very short in comparison to some other sections of the Doctrine and Covenants that we have. So who is Joseph Knight Sr.? Well, we have this. In late 1826, Knight began employing Joseph Smith as a day laborer, and Joseph Smith soon gained enough favor with Knight that he loaned Joseph Smith his horse and cutter to go see his girl, Emma Hale. Now, how about that for a good man, whom Joseph Smith soon married? I just love that. Go see your girl. Here's my horse and cutter. I thought that was fun. In September 1827, Knight was at the Joseph Smith Sr. home the night Joseph Smith obtained the plates, and he later reported that Joseph Smith gave him a detailed description of the plates and the Urim and Thummim. That winter, Joseph Smith and Emma, who had returned to Harmony, Pennsylvania, fell on hard times and asked Knight for assistance. He says, I let him have some little provisions and some few things out of the store, a pair of shoes, and $3 in money to help him a little, wrote Knight. So this is just kind of a good neighbor, a good guy. Just here's my horse. I would like to believe, and this was a favorite story apparently, that when Joseph clocked somebody, dislocated a thumb, and said, "Hey, Dad, before I tell the story, do you mind snapping? Ouch, thank you." Snapped it back into place. That Joseph Knight was there to be like, okay, yeah, why don't you relocate your thumb before you tell me the story anyway? So he's been involved in this, which is kind of fun. And I know in such works like The Work and the Glory, so Gerald Lund wrote a sort of historical fiction, and I believe he sort of wrapped Joseph Knight Sr. up into the Steed fictional family. Anyway, just to kind of give some context, it's just some interesting stories about what they would have witnessed. So, a good neighbor. Anyway, moving on. Knight provided support that helped Joseph Smith recommence the translation after Martin Harris lost the initial manuscript in July of 1828. In January of 1829, Joseph Smith Sr. and Samuel Smith stopped at Knight's home on their way from Manchester, New York, to visit Joseph Smith in Harmony. Knight took him the rest of the way in his sleigh, and once they arrived in Harmony, he gave Joseph Smith Sr. a $50 and also gave Joseph Smith money to buy paper for the translation. Knight may have also returned to Harmony to aid Joseph Smith at other times between January and May of 1829. Joseph Knight Jr. wrote, "Father and I often went to see him," Joseph Smith, "and carry him something to live upon." So, to put this a little bit more succinctly, a lot of the paper that we currently have from the original manuscript was bought by Joseph Knight Sr., who, Joseph and Oliver had run out of paper. They're all different lengths. Some of them are lines, some of them are not. They wrote on whatever they could get. And we can thank Joseph Knight Sr. for some of that paper. I would also say that they're being very generous here and very vague, but Joseph and Oliver might have starved because they were moving so much they couldn't plant and do all that kind of stuff. And they were really trying to focus on the translation of the Book of Mormon. And so the food that the Knight family gave to them kind of saved their lives. So these are pretty significant, in my opinion, very significant acts that the Knight family did. And I just love that it's not $1,000. It's like, here's $2, here's $5, here's Just something to get you by, something to feed you, something to give you paper. So that's pretty cool. Some other facts about Joseph Knight Sr. So he was born in Massachusetts in 1772, which means he was 4 years old when the Declaration of Independence was written and signed. So just to put that into context. He was a Universalist, and he hired Joseph Smith in 1826 to just kind of do some jobs. He was present at the Smith family farm when Joseph Smith retrieved the gold plates in 1827. He was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by Oliver Cowdery. It was called the Church of Christ at the time, actually, but he was baptized by Oliver Cowdery on the 28th of June, 1830, at Colesville. So he was not baptized in Fayette. As much involvement as he had, that's just not something that he was involved with. So that's a little about Joseph Knight. So what are we doing leading up to section 12? Well, we've got this from the historical introduction from Documents, Volume 1. When Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery were running low on provisions in May 1829, they temporarily stopped translating and journeyed to Colesville to see Knight. Although absent at the time, Knight soon traveled to Harmony with more paper and with provisions enough to last until the translation was done. Joseph Smith may have dictated this revelation during that visit. Introducing the revelation, Joseph Smith's history stated that Knight was, quote, very anxious to know his duty as to this work. I inquired of the Lord for him and obtained as follows. So there is some suspicion, and I think I agree with this, that sections 11 and 12 were actually given basically at the same time. So the historical introduction again says, when in May in 1829 this revelation was dictated is unknown, in part because it is unclear how many times and when Knight traveled to Harmony to assist Joseph Smith. The revelation dates from the same general period as the revelation for Hiram Smith and may have preceded it. Again, further to that, where I think it makes sense, it is possible that Knight gave Hiram a ride to Harmony, as he had done for Joseph Smith Sr. and Samuel a few months earlier, and that the two revelations came during this trip. Neither Knight's history nor other accounts give exact dates as to when Knight arrived. So, yeah, hey, I'm heading down to Harmony. Anybody want to ride? Hiram? Yeah, come on, get in the wagon. Yeah, I won't say. Well, yeah, get in the wagon, losers. We're going revelating. Anyway, whatever. Dumb reference. So, yeah, so that's section 12. And again, it's bring forth the cause of Zion and, keep the commandments and follow the Spirit and, stand by my servant. He's a really, really good man in that regard. So, a little further into that, he was a farmer and a miller with various holdings. He married Polly Peck in 1796. Polly actually died in 1831. So this is after Joseph Sr. Joined the church. He then married Phoebe Crosby Peck in 1833. He moved with the Saints to Ohio and then to Nauvoo, so he was a part of that whole thing. And Joseph Knight Sr. was on the trek west to settle in the Salt Lake Valley when he died in Mount Pisgah, I hope I'm saying that right, Iowa, in 1847 at the age of 74. So he actually lived a pretty good long life, and he was on his way to Utah when he passed away. So that is Joseph Knight Sr. And he's kind of a background character with a lot of stuff, but in like a very significant way. Like, again, keeping these guys alive. He received his own revelation. He gave paper, which I would like to believe we still have today. We don't know exactly, what paper was what, but yeah, a very important figure in this. So moving on to how the Joseph Smith papers ordered things in Documents Volume 1. So what we get from that is the earliest extant copies of the very first part of the Book of Mormon. So what we're talking about here, these manuscript pages is basically 1 Nephi chapter 2, verse 2 through 1 Nephi chapter 3, verse 18. This is the front and back of a very long piece of paper. The handwriting is from Oliver Cowdery, John Whitmer, and an unknown scribe, although the unknown scribe is not very prominent. There's just little things here and there. We have the facsimile version from the printed volume. And as you can see here, there's different color codes for different people. They were kind of making little notes or maybe a heading, page numbers, things like that. Nothing really to do with the translation per se. And that is just a high definition photograph that we get. I believe his name is Weldon Anderson, took these photos. Very, very talented photographer, I would say. And then what's interesting is what the Documents Volume 1 is using. So if you were to go to Joseph Smith's website, you're going to see this, which is a photostatic copy. This was done in the early 1920s. And it kind of reads like a negative, which in my opinion is really handy for text because it kind of brings out the lettering. And this was really nice because this is 100 years ago that this photostatic copy was taken. So a lot of the fading of age and time is not there. It's still, maybe a little hard to read occasionally, but it's a lot more clear. And so we're very fortunate to have that. And that, I believe, was done by what is now called the Community of Christ, but at the time was the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So once again, if any of you are listening, just from this amateur historian, thank you so much for doing this. It's enormously valuable to anybody studying these papers. So anyway, so that's what we have. That's what we have left, and it's in pretty good shape. So I love the source note of this too. It just gives you a couple of just kind of the dynamics behind all this. So for example, this leaf, this paper that you have, measures 16 3/8 inches tall by 7 inches wide. That is a very long piece of paper. The original manuscript of the Book of Mormon was placed in the cornerstone of the Nauvoo house in 1841. I said Nauvoo Temple. I misspoke. It was the Nauvoo house. My apologies. In 1882, the manuscript was removed, but it had suffered considerable damage from water. So 40 years later, it gets pulled out. And this is a name you should know. Louis Bideman, second husband of Emma Hale Smith, gave portions of the manuscript to visitors of Nauvoo. Through the years, many of these have been collected or donated to several different repositories, including the Church History Library, Salt Lake City, Utah, and the J. Willard Marriott Library at the University of Utah, which is also in Salt Lake City. Additionally, some fragments of the manuscript are in private possession. Only about 28% of the original manuscript is now known to be extant, and much of that is in the form of fragments. The excerpt featured below was acquired with about 20 other pages by Sarah M. Kimball in September of 1883 and given to Joseph F. Smith, a member of the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in October of 1883. It is unknown when the fragment came into the possession of the church historian's office, but sometime after that, let's call it. So that's how we have this particular paper. I thought that was interesting. There's a lot of story behind these, but apparently Louis Bideman would break off pieces of it and hand it to people as a souvenir for visiting Nauvoo. And over time, we have those back, and some of them are kind of a mess. I mean, they're little fragments that we've had to use spectrologics and things like that to try to pull the lettering out to find out what we're reading. And anyway, a really fascinating story behind that. Again, the amount of work that went into putting these volumes together is astronomical. So the historical introduction behind this. Joseph Smith moved forward in earnest only after Oliver Cowdery arrived to serve as his full-time scribe in early April 1829. During April and May of 1829, Joseph Smith and Cowdery apparently translated the portion of the Book of Mormon from Mosiah through, including the Book of Moroni. So in 1 month, you get Mosiah through the end of what we currently have as the Book of Mormon. The end of the Book of Moroni. Then it says, Joseph Smith and Cowdery relocated to Peter Whitmer Sr.'s home in Fayette, New York, in early June of 1829 and promptly resumed the translation. It was a laborious work, recalled David Whitmer, for the weather was very warm and the days were long, and they worked from morning till night. While the timetable of the translation is not known with certainty, analysis of the manuscript suggests that Joseph Smith translated the portion from the first book of Nephi through Words of Mormon that became the first part of the Book of Mormon at the Whitmer home during June. So again, in 1 month, you get First Nephi through Words of Mormon. This was in accordance with a revelation that had instructed Joseph Smith to translate the engravings which are upon the plates of Nephi, which covered the same time period as the pages lost by Harris, a manuscript that Joseph Smith made no effort to retranslate. So to review, Mosiah through Moroni is done in Harmony, Pennsylvania in 1 month, in the summer, basically April and May of 1829. First Nephi through Words of Mormon, as we have it now, was actually done in Fayette. They actually moved the translation over and did that one in the month of June. So, something that I researched is quite amazing. The pages that were lost, just to put this, and so what I did is I took a look at the average page, intact page that we had from, the earliest stuff, which would have been, in our case, the Book of Alma is all we have extant from that. So the size of those pages were not so quite long. They were shorter. And I just did some do we have 116 consecutive pages of the Book of Mormon existing? And the answer is no, we do not. Just to give you a sense of how much was really lost. And I'm saying pages. I'm going to be generous and say page 1, page 2 are on a single sheet of paper pages, which I think is what they were referring to. If that's the case, then the entire Book of Alma and all the way to Helaman chapter 3 would have been lost. Or to put it another way, all of 1st and 2nd Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jerem, Omni, Words of Mormon, and a little bit into Mosiah, I would say all the way to maybe chapter 10 is how much 116 pages were worth, just to kind of give you a comparative note. It is a lot that they lost. And I find it interesting that unless my math is wrong, and it very well could be, and I'm just guessing because we don't know, they translated less, like the plates of Nephi tree translation, First Nephi through Words of Mormon, is shorter in length than the Book of Lehi. That's my guess. So just amateur historian here giving you a little opinion. Another thing that I really, really love to point out here, which I thought was fun, and this is from the Joseph Smith papers, again, just a footnote here. It says, the text transcribed here, and take a look at it, the text transcribed here, as with other extant portions of the original manuscript, exhibits very few signs of editing. It contains spelling errors characteristic of each particular scribe. Letting that sink in, that's a remarkable thing that the most original version of this has no editing marks on it. That's kind of weird that you could dictate a story like that and never make a change. Just saying. The printer's manuscript obviously is a copy of this. And again, there's really not a whole lot of changes there. There's some spelling corrections, perhaps. And just if you don't know, they put little headings at the top of a page just to kind of describe where you are in the story, and that was just people doing their thing at page numbers. But other than that, to put it rudely, it's kind of a boring read. It's just like reading the Book of Mormon. It's just somebody else's handwriting. So it's kind of an interesting side note. So moving right along, lots to talk about. The next thing we get into is the title page of the Book of Mormon. So that's a little sample of what they were doing at the time to kind of put everything into context. Now we have the title page, and this and the copyright sort of play together in an interesting way. So the first printed Joseph Smith paper, are you ready? Is from the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. It exists there to this day. And I don't know if your library card's that good, but apparently you could go take it, or not take it, but you could go look at it and take a look at it. It's in the Library of Congress. So we get this from the sort of summary of the title page of the Book of Mormon. This is from Documents, Volume 1. It says, the following document, a copy of the title page of the Book of Mormon, is the first printed Joseph Smith document. Joseph Smith submitted it to the United States District Court for the Northern District of New York as part of his application for a federal copyright. Conforming with copyright law, he submitted a printed copy of the full title page, which he later explained was translated from the plates. I'll get to that in a moment. The clerk of the court, Richard R. Lansing, filed this title page in Utica, New York on the 11th of June, 1829, suggesting that it was printed no later than the first few days of June, 1829. Lansing completed an official copyright form that same day and included a handwritten copy of the title page that he likely copied from the document featured below. So like I said, I'll get to the copyright in a moment. There's a little funny moment about that. Richard sort of miscalculated his font size. It's kind of fun. Anyway, just again, problems that existed then, problems that still exist now. It's just the way it is. So Joseph Smith actually explains in draft 2. This is the official, this was a printed History of the Church thing. It is not in the Pearl of Great Price, but because we're kind of beyond that now. But Joseph Smith explains where this came from. So this I'm taking from draft 2. Says, I wish also to mention here that the title page of the Book of Mormon is a literal translation taken from the very last leaf on the left-hand side of the collection or book of plates, which contain the record which has been translated. They strike out, and not by any means, then continues, the language of the whole running same as all Hebrew writing in general, and that said title page is not by any means a modern composition either of mine or of any other man's who has lived or does live in this generation. Therefore, in order to correct an error which generally exists concerning it, I give below that part of the title page of the English version of the Book of Mormon, which is a genuine and literal translation of the title page of the original Book of Mormon, as recorded on the plates. If you're wondering where that title page comes from, that's where it comes from. And this, my friends, is the very first printed thing that Joseph Smith produced. So that's the title page. Now, why are we getting into the title page? Well, let's talk about the copyright of the Book of Mormon. I'm taking this out of order just to kind of keep these subjects together, but this comes later in the Joseph Smith papers. Forgive me. It's like 2 ahead, amateur historian here. Just chill out. In church, the copyright of the Book of Mormon has actually been in the custody of this church organization since it was received from the Northern District of New York. So, a historical introduction to this I find very interesting. So the federal copyright statute of 1790 was, as amended in 1802, outlined 5 steps to obtaining a copyright. The applicant was to deposit a copy of a work's title page with the clerk of the federal district court, pay for the copyright certificate, publish the certificate in the newspaper in 4 consecutive weeks over the next 2 months, print the certificate in the book, and provide a copy of the book to the United States Secretary of State within 6 months of its publication. The copyright record presented here resulted from Joseph Smith's compliance with the first 2 requirements. So let's go through it. What's it take to copyright a book in 1829 or 1830? So for all intents, I won't get into the details of it, but we think Joseph Smith probably mailed this to the Supreme Court Northern District of New York. We don't really have a lot of indications, and because of the way they were moving, we just think he mailed it in. Fine. You can still do that today if you want to copyright something. So step 1, it includes the work's title page. So here it is, the title page. This is the original writing that we get. This is from the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. This is the most original version that we have. And then, of course, you have the Library of Congress version of it. This is taken from the plates. I find this very interesting that if we are to believe the Book of Mormon is true, that some guy well over 1,000 years ago decided for some reason to write a title page that fulfills modern copyright laws. I find that to be very Book of Lehi-ish, because the belief is that the writers of the Book of Mormon, and that includes Nephi, that includes Mormon, a little bit of Moroni, I believe, but it's discussed. Like, why am I doing this? I don't really know. And then you get this title page, which conveniently is the first step. Anyway, just a side note. Step 2 is you're supposed to pay for the copyright certificate. And so because we assume that he did that, because this is the actual copyright page that we still have. There's a corner missing here, as you can see. But it seems like he paid for it because Richard Lansing actually produced, a document for him. And what I love, if you take a look at this, is he starts writing the title page and the text gets smaller and smaller and smaller because this is a long title page. Anyway, it's kind of funny. I do that all the time. Again, because I'm an amateur. So anyway, the step 3 is to print their certificate in a newspaper for 4 weeks. Now, as far as we know, they might not have actually fulfilled this. So, got a footnote for you here. It says on June 26, 1829, the Palmyra, New York Wayne Sentinel published the title page and the copyright notice. But this apparently fell short of the legal requirement to print the title page for 4 consecutive weeks in a local newspaper. Only one advertisement appeared in the Wayne Sentinel in the 2 months that followed. In what may have been an attempt by Joseph Smith to satisfy the copyright law, the Wayne Sentinel advertised the Book of Mormon for 4 consecutive issues, but did not include the complete copyright notice. Eesh. So they did not do step 3. As far as we can, again, maybe we lost it, but as far as we can tell, they didn't do it. Step 4, print their certificate in the Book of Mormon, in the book, sorry. So this is from the 1830 edition. This, as you can see, is just a word-for-word reproduction of the copyright notice, including Mr. Lansing's printed signature, if you will, at the end. So that was fulfilled. Step 5, provide a copy of the book to the Secretary of State, which we don't have any evidence that they ever did that, but I can't, I mean, if wrap it up in paper and mail it, I don't know. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But so, I don't know. 3 out of 5? Does that work? Anyway, so that's the copyright of the Book of Mormon, and kind of fun that we still have it. So it's still in church possession, and it fulfilled the copyright as far as we can tell. So, again, why is this important? Title pages, copyright pages. Some interesting things about that I'm getting from the copyright page historical introductions. Finding a printer was kind of tough for the Book of Mormon. And all of this, by the way, is happening in between sections 12, 13, 14, and 15, 16, and 17. So just know that this is chronology that we're going into as part of the history is concerned. So here's one from the historical introduction. Printers in the area had little or no experience printing books that were as large and as expensive as the Book of Mormon. The copyright decreased the financial risk of publishing the book and therefore gave Joseph Smith additional power to negotiate with potential printers. Joseph Smith's early efforts to find a printer were apparently conducted in and around Palmyra, where E.B. Grandin originally rejected his proposal, likely fearing that the Book of Mormon would not be, that the book would not be profitable. So if you didn't know, E.B. Grandin said no originally. Then, after successful attempts in Palmyra, Joseph Smith and Martin Harris solicited printers in Rochester, New York. There, Thurlow Weed appears to have rejected the proposal, even though Harris offered his farm as payment. But then, Joseph Smith met success. His proposal was accepted by printer Elihu F. Marshall. Most of you probably have never heard of that person. So Joseph Smith returned to Palmyra with Marshall's offer, and this time he successfully negotiated with Grandin. After the agreement was in place, Joseph Smith returned to his home in Harmony, Pennsylvania. He did not sell his copyright to Grandin or negotiate an agreement to share the profits from the book's sale, nor did he need to once Harris had agreed to be the financier. John H. Gilbert, the typesetter of the Book of Mormon, estimated the cost for printing 5,000 books at $3,000. That's where we get that number from, is John H. Gilbert's estimation. A figure that included a profit for Grandin. If enough books sold, Harris could recoup what he had provided by mortgaging part of his farm for $3,000, and Joseph Smith might even make a profit. So so here's E.B. Grandin. This is a picture that many of you may have seen if you know anything about church history. He is the one that did the printing, and sort of his bookstore held the Book of Mormon for a long time. That's in Palmyra, New York. And a recreation of that printing office still stands today. So if you want to go back to Palmyra and actually see the printing office and get a little tour about what it means to print a book, you can still do that. I believe that is also run by the church. I believe that's owned by the church and run by you'll see full-time missionaries in there. And then there's John Gilbert. He actually never joins the church, but he is the typesetter for the Book of Mormon. He's actually the one that set the type. And boy, does he love to pose. Look at this picture. Like, he is posing like a boss with what's called a gathering of the printed version of the Book of Mormon. And so this is another photo of John Gilbert. So love the hair. Thank you, John. Never joined the church, but he's the reason why we have the Book of Mormon published, which is pretty cool. So why are these important? I wanted to just point out one more thing, again, because I love shouting out to the reorganized church as well as to the community of Christ. I actually have here in my hot little hands, and let me just make sure I got the date right here. This is a 1953 edition of the Book of Mormon that looks a little different to a Latter-day Saint. But down here, you're going to see Herald Publishing. This is published in Independence, Missouri. This is the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints edition of the Book of Mormon. And the biggest difference, quite frankly, is just the length of chapters and chapter and verses. But just wanted to say, the title page of the Book of Mormon is here. And if you flip over that, you have the testimony of the 3 witnesses and the testimony of the 8 witnesses. I am not kidding when this is always, I've said this a million times now, but the title page, not the original copyright pages. They secure different copyrights later down the line. But those things, the testimony pages and the title page, are in every edition you'll find, even whether or not it's an official Church of Jesus Christ thing or not. So once again, huge shout out to the reorganization for preserving these very important things. So that's part 1. That was huge. That was long. But what I wanted to do is kind of give a sense of where we are and be faithful to all the wonderful work that the editors of the Joseph Smith papers have done. So in part 2, we're going to start getting into section 13 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is a very interesting story about the restoration of one of the priesthood orders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So stay tuned for that. All right, this is part 2 of our episode. This is section 13 of the Doctrine and Covenants. From Filling in the History, I am the amateur historian. So let's get into an introduction into what section 13 is and what it is not. So section 13 is not a revelation in the strictest sense of the word. It is a lot like section 2 of our current Doctrine and Covenants, where it is an extract from a historical account. So the only record of this section, as we now have it, is recorded in drafts 2 and 3 of the manuscript history of the church. So there is no paper with this. This is just something that was recounted by Joseph Smith. There's also an Oliver Cowdery version of this history that we'll get into in a moment. So this is what we get from, I believe this is from draft 2. And it says, "We still continued the work of translation when in the ensuing month, which is May 1829, we on a certain day went into the woods to pray and inquire of the Lord respecting baptism for the remission of sins, as we found mentioned in the translation of the plates. While we were thus employed praying and calling upon the Lord, a messenger from heaven descended in a cloud of light, and having laid his hands upon us, he ordained us, saying unto us," quote, and that's section 13, "Upon you, my fellow servants, in the name of Messiah, I confer upon you the priesthood of Aaron," and so forth. Section 13 is a whopping 1 verse long, because what the church has done is basically lifted that statement right after he says, he's basically quoting this angel that comes down. What I love, there's a footnote here, footnote 54 from this, which is in just the draft 2 footnote, says that Oliver Cowdery indicated specifically that the impetus for seeking further information about baptism was the translation of the, quote, "the account given of the Savior's ministry to the remnant of the seed of Jacob upon this continent." So in modern terms, what that means is sometimes post 3rd Nephi chapter 11, as it is in the church's version of the Book of Mormon. In there, in fact, one of the first things you really get into is gospel ordinances, and you get into baptism right away. And there's kind of a training in the Book of Mormon about, you're going to stand in the water. These are the words you're going to say. You're going to immerse them fully and bring them forth. That's all in there. Apparently, that was the impetus behind them saying, how about we go into the woods and ask what this is all about and what we should do about it. Oliver Cowdery gives his own record of this event, but does not give this language as we have it in section 13. So now we're going into Histories, Volume 1, and this is from an 1834 to 1836 history that Oliver Cowdery wrote. It says this: "The veil was parted, and the angel of God came down clothed with glory and delivered the anxiously looked-for message and the keys of the gospel of repentance." Further to that, "But, dear brother, think further for a moment. what joy filled our hearts, and with what surprise we must have bowed, for who would not have bowed the knee for such a blessing, when we received under his hand the holy priesthood, as he said, "Upon you, my fellow servants, in the name of Messiah, I confer this priesthood and this authority, which shall remain upon the earth, that the sons of Levi may yet offer an offering unto the Lord in righteousness. I shall not attempt to paint to you the feelings of this heart, nor the majestic beauty and glory which surrounded us on this occasion, but you will believe me when I say that earth nor men, with the eloquence of time, cannot begin to clothe language in as interesting and sublime a manner as this holy personage." Very poetic. So this is a little different. So in section 13, we get keys of the Aaronic priesthood: ministering of angels, gospel of repentance, which is mentioned here, and baptism by immersion for the remission of sins. And then he says, "This shall never again be taken away from the earth, until the sons of Levi do again offer an offering unto the Lord in righteousness." Whereas Oliver Cowdery says, "so that they can," which I guess is in a way splitting hairs if you want to interpret it that way, but a little different. So that's Oliver Cowdery's version of it. So they're ordained. And in the aftermath of this section, there are instructions that John the Baptist gives. So if you don't know, the angel that we're referring to here identifies himself as John, who baptized Jesus Christ, and in the New Testament was beheaded. And so he comes back as an angel, John the Baptist, and gives Joseph and Oliver the rights of the Aaronic priesthood and ordains them to the priesthood order. And then gives them some instructions. He said, "This Aaronic priesthood had not the power of laying on of hands for the gift of the Holy Ghost, but that this should be conferred on us hereafter, and he commanded us to go and be baptized, and gave us directions that I should baptize Oliver Cowdery, and afterward that he should baptize me." After the story of the ordination and the baptism, draft 2 then gives us the angel's name. So maybe I messed up the lead on that one. But anyway, he says, "The messenger who visited us on this occasion and conferred this priesthood upon us said that his name was John, the same that is called John the Baptist in the New Testament, and that he acted under the direction of Peter, James, and John, who held the keys of the priesthood of Melchizedek, which priesthood, he said, should in due time be conferred on us, and that I should be called the first elder of the church, and he the second," Oliver Cowdery. "It was on the 15th day of May, 1829, that we were baptized under and ordained under the hand of that, or the messenger." So there you go. Now there's a footnote here, which I found interesting. Apparently this term, Aaronic priesthood, is anachronistic. I'll explain that in a moment. So it says, the use of the term Aaronic priesthood in an 1829 context is anachronistic. The first term appears in Joseph Smith's written record in a document dated circa April 1835. An earlier revelation of September of 1832 referred to, quote, "the lesser priesthood, which priesthood was confirmed upon Aaron and his sons." So this history, draft 2, is given in 1838. This is 9 years later, and he's kind of retroactively calling it the Aaronic priesthood. But I think for a long time, it was called perhaps the lesser priesthood. I know it is called also the Levitical priesthood. I don't know if the early church members used that term. But anyway, all those three things, Aaronic priesthood, lesser priesthood, Levitical priesthood, apparently refer to the same priesthood order. And in modern terms, and that's as far as we take this section, there's not a whole lot of other stories about this. We have Oliver Cowdery's version, we have Joseph Smith's version, which was written by James Mulholland, that actually penned it. Sorry, just to be clear about what I mean by that. But there's a couple of things here, just so you know, that are it's kind of where this goes today, if you're not familiar with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So there are 3 offices in the Aaronic priesthood. You have a deacon, you have a teacher, and a priest. And for a long time, I want to say until like 1922, these were held by whoever. And there are indications, and we'll probably get into this when we get into section 20 and further when they organize the church. Um, Priests can baptize people, and we do that today. So if you are a priest in the Aaronic priesthood, you have the right to baptize somebody as a convert to the church. Also, in a very recent move, which I think probably happened in previous temple things, I haven't really looked into it, but just my knowledge of church workings, priests can also baptize for the dead in the temples. So that authority is sort of extended to them there as well. What they can't do, as is indicated here, is confirm somebody a member of the church or give them the gift of the Holy Ghost. And then there's sealing in the temple and marriages and so forth. None of that can be done by the Aaronic priesthood. So that would sort of explain why Joseph Smith, so Joseph ordains Oliver, Oliver then ordains Joseph. They go into the water. Joseph baptizes Oliver, then Oliver baptizes Joseph. And so in theory, we can kind of say they were acting as priests in the Aaronic priesthood. Very recently, like I said, since 1922, they've changed it to where it's really a sort of young men's order of the priesthood. So the earliest you can be baptized into the church is the age of 8. We believe that is the age of accountability. That's when you can be baptized and confirmed a member. So if you wanted to, if your older brother was a priest or something like that, not an elder or anything, he could actually baptize you, which is kind of cool. But at the age of 12, so this is a shift, again, early 20s. At the age of 12, you can start your ministry in the Aaronic priesthood as a boy, as a 12-year-old boy. And recently, and I want to say this is maybe in the last 5 years, they've made it in your 12th year. So like when the year that you turn 12, rather than ordaining kids throughout the year, they basically say, okay, you're 11 now, but you're going to be 12 in a couple of months. So you're going to be ordained a deacon and conferred, have the Aaronic priesthood conferred upon you. And then at the age of 14, you become a teacher. And at the age of 16, you become a priest. At that point, you can bless the sacrament, baptize others. So basically from 16 to 18 years old, you can do baptisms for the dead, you can baptize people, bless the sacrament in churches, and those are official ordinances. And it's kind of a cool program that we actually allow very young men to start their ministry in the priesthood. That's what happened to me. I was ordained when I was 12. Usually around 18 years old is now when we send missionaries off. That's when they are ordained to the Melchizedek priesthood. Then they can do more things. And then after that, I'm not really aware of any hard and fast age rule behind the priesthood, but those age rules were a 20th century, earliest 20th century affectation that happened. That's what they did. So just to explain what the Aaronic priesthood is. And that's all we have for John the Baptist, for the Aaronic priesthood, for another angel visiting Joseph and Oliver. And in this case, as far as I can tell, Oliver's first experience with an angelic visit. And we will get into another one pretty soon. Oliver Cowdery had a few of these, actually. So stay tuned for section. It's going to be, I believe, what are we doing? I think it's sections 14 through 16, which is part 3. All right, welcome to part 3. This is sections 14 through 16 of the Doctrine and Covenants. I am the amateur historian. This is filling in the history. So let's get into the introduction to the papers that we now have as sections 14 through 16. So these are included in the section of Revelation Book 1 that was lost. So we do not have that. The earliest extant copies are from the 1833 Book of Commandments. So, and they also appear, all of these appear in the original Doctrine and Covenants, which was printed 2 years later in 1835. So 14, 15, and 16, as we have it now, were originally chapters 12, 13, and 14 in the Book of Commandments. As we have it now, again, 12, 14, 15, 16, there was actually sections 39, 40, and 41 in the original Doctrine and Covenants. But these Book of Commandments sections, or chapters, as they call them then, are the earliest extant copies of these revelations. We assume that they were in Revelation Book 1 because they are in the index, but they were just somehow taken out and now lost to us. So there's these 3 sections are given basically at the same time to the Whitmer family. We have, I think the first one goes to David Whitmer, the second one goes to John Whitmer, and the last one goes to Peter Whitmer. I could have that wrong, but I believe that's what it is. So the historical introduction behind this. Cowdery informed Whitmer that he intended to go to Harmony to see Joseph Smith about the plates. On his journey, Cowdery stopped in Fayette to visit Whitmer and promised to write him regarding what he learned. Cowdery sent at least 3 letters to Whitmer from Harmony, the last of which directed Whitmer to bring his wagon to Harmony and move Joseph and Cowdery to Fayette. So if you remember from a previous section, what they had done to this point in terms of Book of Mormon translation is they had translated the Book of Mosiah all the way to the Book of Moroni, and then he basically writes him a letter and says, "Bro, can you pick me up?" Which is maybe an exact quote. We got to head over to Fayette, New York. It's getting a little rough over here. And once they get to Fayette, they do First Nephi through Words of Mormon. So that's where that letter is. So continuing on. Aided by what they considered divine manifestations, the Whitmers quickly became followers of Joseph Smith. There's a whole story about that. David Whitmer later recounted that during their journey to Fayette, he, Cowdery, and Joseph Smith briefly encountered a, quote, pleasant, nice-looking old man, whom Joseph Smith identified by revelation as a heavenly messenger transporting the plates. Whitmer also recalled that soon after their arrival in Fayette, his mother, Mary Musselman Whitmer, was met by the same old man who showed her the plates. So if you'd like to know, Mary Whitmer, apparently, was shown the plates. So we have the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses, but there were some other people who saw these things. And that's from their own records. So again, take it as it is. Joseph Smith's history recorded that David, John, and Peter Whitmer Jr. became our zealous friends and assistants in the work. And being anxious to know their respective duties, and having desired with much earnestness that I should inquire of the Lord concerning them, I did so, through the means of the Urim and Thummim, and obtained for them in succession the following revelations, referring to this revelation and the June 1829 revelations directed to John Whitmer and Peter Whitmer Jr. The 5 revelations dated June 1829 are presented herein in the order found in the index to the Revelation Book 1. That's why it's maybe a little different. So that's where we get it from. That's how we get them and why we have them. So let's just go one by one. Section 15, Introduction. So that's a lot of what we get from Section 14. And because these are very short sections, and because they are almost identical, quite frankly, this will, again, be kind of brief. So, historical introduction from Documents Volume 1 of the Joseph Smith Papers. We get 3 of the sons of Peter Whitmer Sr., John, who was 26, David, who was 24, and Peter Jr., who was 19, all became zealous friends and assistants in the work. Peter Jr. and David were baptized sometime in June 1829 in Seneca Lake, New York, and John was probably one of those baptized the same month. So that's that. So, Section 16's introduction we get, again, from Documents Volume 1. This revelation for Peter Whitmer Jr., dictated in early June 1829, is identical to the revelation for John Whitmer, which apparently preceded it. So, what are we talking about here? They had to have their field plowed, and they woke up the next day and it was like plowed and done. And they saw that as a divine manifestation so that they could assist with the work that Joseph was doing. And again, they housed the translation of what we would now call the first portion of the Book of Mormon, First Nephi through Words of Mormon. And in that same location, the church was organized. So there's a lot of very important things going on here. And they felt, and they had these various experiences like miraculous chores being done and work being done for them that liberated them to be able to be a part of it. They saw that as divine, and they wanted to kind of learn what their portion was. And there's 2 instances, and this is 15 and 16, where the Lord does the same thing. Again, if you sort of from a believer's perspective, the Lord kind of gives these revelations and says, I'm going to tell you something that nobody else knows. So he did this to Oliver Cowdery. He says, I know you cried at night to me, and I spoke peace to you. What greater witness can you have than from God? This is a kind of a repeat of that method, where he says to these 2, you have been wondering what's going to be of most worth in your life. And the answer comes to bring souls to repentance, right? To bring people to Christ, and the implication from obviously a Latter-day Saint perspective is to have them join this church and this movement and have them believe. And so this is these two scriptures are often quoted when it comes to members of the church, especially full-time missionaries or people who have special callings in the church, that this is a very worthy pursuit of your time. And these are very short sections. But that's basically what they are told is, I'm going to tell you what's most worth in your life. And I know that this method is still used in today's church, where people will say, like, what's the most important thing I can be doing with my time on earth? So the aftermath of this is from sections 14 through 16. David Whitmer becomes one of the 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon. And by extension, becomes those 3 witnesses actually called the original 12 apostles, which include future presidents of the church. So he's a very important figure because of that. John and Peter become 2 of the 8 witnesses. And so, their faith made them a part of it. In fact, John Whitmer is a big part of Revelation book dictation. And he also has his own section of history in our Histories volumes in the Joseph Smith papers. So that is the Whitmer family. And these are very short sections. Again, trying to just dictate what's of most worth. And this is how we got them. So in our very last part, we're going to be going into section 17 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and a little bit more about the 3 witnesses and what that all means, and why that's so important to the publication of the Book of Mormon. So we're kind of coming to the end of the Book of Mormon being this main theme underlying all of this early church history stuff that we've been talking about. So stay tuned for part 4, and we'll see you then. And welcome back to part 4. We're talking about Doctrine and Covenants, section 17. I am the amateur historian, and we're filling in the history. So the introduction behind this... if you are to look at the chronology in the Joseph Smith papers, section 18 actually comes between sections 14 and 15. There's going to be an entire episode about that, but just know that that's in there. And we're going to dive a lot more into that in our next episode, as well as the Book of Mormon copyright. And I've already discussed that in a previous part to this episode. So see previous material from me. But that's the chronology from Documents, Volume 1 of the Joseph Smith papers, just letting you know what it looks like. So saving that, Section 18 and the Book of Mormon copyright has already been discussed. And I would like to believe that, like, they sent in to get this copyright and they were waiting on the mail to get it back. So anyway, just my 2 bits. But the earliest copy of Section 17, which is now where we're at, comes after Section 18, is actually from Revelation Book 2. Ding, ding, ding. We finally got there. It is in the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams. And this Revelation book has always been in Latter-day Saint possession. So Revelation Book 1 was originally with the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, later the Community of Christ, and very recently purchased by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I believe around the same time that we also purchased the Kirtland Temple. But Revelation Book 2 we've always had. So that is the earliest extant copy. Bigger lettering than maybe you're used to with John Whitmer out of Revelation Book 1. Section 17 is actually not in the Book of Commandments, which is kind of interesting because Revelation Book 2 was actually hand-scribed around 1832. So they would have had time to print it off in 1833 for the Book of Commandments if they wanted to, but they didn't. So there you go. So it does appear that its first appearance in a published work is going to be as Section 42 in the original Doctrine and Covenants. That's in 1835, a couple of years later. And so Revelation Book 2 would have been written sometime in March of 1831, 1832. Sorry, I said that wrong. 1831 is when it was done. So there was plenty of time, but for some reason not in our Book of Commandments. So what are the circumstances around this? Well, historical introductions to this paper is the text of the Revelation implies that it was dictated after the translation was finished, translation of the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith later said that it was, quote, not many days after the revelation was given that he, Oliver Cowdery, Whitmer, and Harris agreed to retire into the woods and try to obtain by fervent and humble prayer the fulfillment of the promises given in this revelation, that they should have a view of the plates. So where do we get that from? That comes from draft 2 of the manuscript history. He says, "We met with many from time to time who were willing to hear us and wishful to find out the truth as it is in Christ Jesus, and apparently willing to obey the gospel when once fairly convinced and satisfied in their own minds. And in this same month of June, my brother Hiram Smith, David Whitmer, and Peter Whitmer Jr. were baptized in Seneca Lake." So that's where that happens. "The two former by myself, the latter by Oliver Cowdery. From this time forth, many became believers and were baptized, whilst we continued to instruct and persuade as many as applied for information." So they were in a far more believing place, just to kind of lead up to where this came from. So things are looking up, and I find it very touching that Joseph Smith apparently baptized his own brother, Hiram Smith, and they later were assassinated together. So very close brothers. And it appears that, if I'm reading this right, Joseph Smith baptizes Hiram Smith and David Whitmer, and then Peter Whitmer Jr. was baptized by Oliver Cowdery, just to put those into context. And then further from draft 2 in the story, "In the course of the work of translation, we ascertained that 3 special witnesses were to be provided by the Lord, to whom he would grant that they should see the plates from which this work, the Book of Mormon, should be translated, and that these witnesses should bear record of the same." So you get this inside of the text of the Book of Mormon. That's where this is coming from. So, and I want to say it's in the Book of Mormon, that in the Book of Mormon. There's a Book of Mormon in the Book of Mormon. I think it's in there if my memory serves, or it could be in the Book of Ether. I should probably look into that, but I'm an amateur historian. Anyway, so after that, these 3 men really took to it. Draft 2, again. "Almost immediately after we had made this discovery, it occurred to Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and the aforementioned Martin Harris, who had come to inquire after our progress in the work, that they would have me inquire of the Lord to know if they might not obtain of him to be these 3 special witnesses. And finally, they became so solicitous and teased me so much that at length I complied, and through the Urim and Thummim I obtained of the Lord for them the following revelation," which is what section 17 is. So, section 17 is, yes, there are going to be 3 witnesses. Yes, Oliver, David, and Martin are those 3 witnesses, and you are to write a declaration and sign your names to it and put it out to the world. And this is in every copy ever printed of the Book of Mormon. It's very important to us. So, what is the aftermath of this? So they get the revelation. Now what? You're witnesses. Great. What do we do? Well, we get this from draft 2. "We accordingly made a choice of a piece of woods convenient to Mr. Whitmer's house, to which we retired, and having knelt down, we began to pray in much faith to Almighty God to bestow upon us a realization of those promises. According to previous arrangement, I commenced by vocal prayer to our Heavenly Father, and was followed by each of the rest in succession. We did not yet, however, obtain any answer or manifestation of the divine favor in our behalf. We again observed the same order of prayer, each calling on and praying fervently to God in rotation, but with the same result as before. Upon this, our second failure, Martin Harris proposed that he would withdraw himself from us, believing, as he expressed himself, that his presence was the cause of our not obtaining what we wished for. He accordingly withdrew from us, and we knelt down again, and had not been many minutes engaged in prayer, when presently we beheld a light above us in the air of exceeding brightness, and behold, an angel stood before us. In his hands he held the plates which we had been praying for those to have a view of. He turned over the leaves one by one, so that we could see them, and discern the engravings thereon distinctly. He addressed himself to David Whitmer, and said, David, blessed is the Lord, and he that keeps all his commandments. When immediately afterwards we heard a voice from out of the bright light above us, saying, These plates have been revealed by the power of God, and they have been translated by the power of God. The translation of them which you have seen is correct, and I command you to bear record of what you now see and hear. And so they wrote down their testimony. So a footnote to this. David Whitmer, and this is from Documents Volume 1, this is footnote number 8. David Whitmer also reported later that he, Cowdery, and Joseph Smith encountered the same messenger carrying the plates in a knapsack as they traveled from Harmony to Fayette. So the implication here is he's like, I've seen you before. And I said this in a previous section. Apparently it was just a guy walking, a very pleasant looking old man, he says. So, yeah. So what happens to Martin Harris? He runs off, right? He probably doesn't run off. He walks off. But back to Martin Harris. We get, I now left David and Oliver and went in pursuit of Martin Harris, who I found at a considerable distance, fervently engaged in prayer. He soon told me, however, that he had not yet prevailed with the Lord, and earnestly requested me to join him in prayer, that he might realize the same blessings which we had just received. We accordingly joined in prayer, and ultimately obtained our desires, for before we had yet finished, the same vision was opened to our view. At least it was again to me, and I once more beheld and seen and heard the same things, whilst at the same moment Martin Harris cried out, apparently in an ecstasy of joy, "'Tis enough, 'tis enough. Mine eyes have beheld, mine eyes have beheld." And jumping up, he shouted, "Hosanna," blessing God, and otherwise rejoiced exceedingly. And so for the last note from this, we get, for the most part, Cowdery, Harris, and Whitmer focused on plates in their public testimonies. Whitmer did, however, make repeated reference to seeing the other objects as well. So this is the Liahona, the sword of Laban, the breastplate, Urim and Thummim, and so forth. And that's what we get. So what you get from there is a written document. Again, it is published in the original 1830 edition, as well as the current editions of the Book of Mormon. This is the testimony of the three witnesses. And the earliest written account that we have is from the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. But this is sort of this official document. This is, they say that they handled it, that an angel came down and saw them, and they wrote their names to it. Now, earlier we were talking about John Whitmer and Peter Whitmer. And they became two of the 8 witnesses. And so my understanding, and I haven't read anything otherwise, is that the 3 witnesses had this divine manifestation, a voice from heaven, Moroni leafing through things with them. And with the 8 witnesses, what they got was Joseph Smith. They were able to, I guess, heft them, as they say, feel them turn over the leaves. No angel was present as far as we know, no divine manifestation, but they did still write it down that says we saw these plates. And as you saw, Mary Whitmer was another person who saw them. Emma Smith saw the outline of them. Lucy Mack Smith saw the outline of them. There's a lot of people who saw these as physical objects in one way or another. And that is it. Quite a lot of sections. So this is, again, 12 through 17. A lot going on here, a lot with the translation. And also at the same time, it's still very early in church history. So there's still a lot of unanswered themes according to what we officially have. But yeah, so enjoy. I hope this has been great. Again, appreciate the comments. We're on YouTube, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. And yeah, I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Filling in the History.